Hey, what up, y'all? I am Lou, and today we're going to be talking about taking SharePoint files, downloading SharePoint files. It could be CSV files, whatever type, it doesn't matter. And we're going to upload these files directly to AWS S3 bucket. Got a few requests about this video, so decided to go ahead and put something together. We're going to be taking code from a previous project that I made, which is the downloading file from SharePoint. So we're actually going to start off with that code base, but we're going to add to it, right? We're going to add the functionality to be able to connect to your AWS environment, and then also, of course, communicate with your S3 bucket to be able to upload files. So let's get started. All right, guys, before we get started, give me a like, give me a follow. That's all I ask. If you can, man, I appreciate it. Let's go. So I created a new folder for this project. I just called it Python SharePoint files to AWS 3. Long name, but that's fine. I have, let me open up, let me open up VS Code. I'm already pointing to that folder. So right now it's empty. There's nothing there, right? We don't have anything there. So we're gonna, the first thing I need to do is create a virtual environment. I'm gonna go through that real quick. You know, that's one of the things that you always hear me mention it over and over again, virtual environments. So let's get that created real quick. What did I call it? SharePoint file. Yep. So now let's do Python M virtual environment. I'm gonna call it env. Again, this is something I have done many times. I think I even have a video. I have a video related to this that goes in more detail, and we test different scenarios as well. So take a look at that if you want to know more. So next, I'm going to go ahead and activate it. If you're using a Mac or Linux, it'll be env bin then activate. That's the only difference. Instead of being scripts, it'll be replaced with bin. Now that I have that activated, first thing, we're going to be using the AWS SDK for Python, which is the Boto 3. I don't honestly, but here's the thing, man. I have heard people different pronunciations of it, and when I read it, I call it Boto 3. I don't think that's how it's pronounced. Boto 3. That's the supposedly the more proper pronunciation. I don't know. I always get stuck on pronouncing it, but either way, it's the AWS SDK for Python, and that's pretty much what we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and get that installed. Boto 3 install. All right. So once this is done installing, the next thing I'm going to end up installing will be SharePoint, because that's what we're using to connect to SharePoint. SharePoint. All right, cool. So now that we have those two installed, that's it. I think that's all we need. So how I mentioned before, we're going to be using the source code that I had in my previous video, the download files from SharePoint video. So because we're going to use that source code, let's go ahead and get that imported in right now, and then we'll get started. So let me get that imported in. Right, so I copied all of the files that I need, and as we can see, we see the files over here now. Let me make sure my config doesn't have my credentials or anything. Nope, it doesn't, so that's good. All right, so the first thing, again, this is our starting point. Clone that project if you want. That'll probably help you out, or just copy the code over. Code could be found at the GitHub account, so I'll provide that the URL and the description for this video. You could find it there. So this is our starting point, right? We have our username, password, and this is all straightforward. This is what we need to use in order to connect to the SharePoint, file. So everything here pretty straightforward. Username, password. Again, if you look at this video, it will kind of go over on how we're utilizing this. It's all relates to connecting to SharePoint. One of the things that we're going to add on here is we're going to add another key, which is going to be, let's see, I'm going to call this AWS bucket. Okay, so in here, under my AWS bucket, I'm going to have some additional settings that's specific for AWS. So for example, one of my settings is going to be AWS access key ID. I'll go through this in a minute on what this is. You do need to create a user in your AWS account. And on top of that, you're going to have it set where it will be accessible via API. So we'll go through that in a few. That's a whole different video that I'm going to make for setting up that user. So hopefully you're aware of that process. If not, again, I'll be making a video soon. Let's see. The other value is going to be AWS secret access key, and then it's going to be bucket name. So this is where we're going to put the name of the bucket that we want to access. Because again, in AWS you can have many buckets, 1 bucket, 10 buckets, really doesn't matter. And then we're going to have another one for bucket sub folder. So let's go ahead and get these two things set up right quick, right? Let me make my text bigger. It's so small. All right, there it goes. So let's go ahead and populate these two values, right? So the logic here is going to be let's see. All right, so I created an AWS account strictly for the purpose of me doing YouTube videos. I have another AWS account that I use for my business. I did not want to use that because, I don't want to be, there's a concern of maybe I accidentally show stuff that I shouldn't be showing, more confidential, things of that nature. Well, this account is strictly for the purpose of doing these tutorials, making videos, things of that nature. For some crazy reason, this ever gets hacked or somebody takes the account away, there's nothing sensitive on here besides my, I guess, bank account information. That's probably it, but they cannot access that information anyways, right? It's saved in there. They could use services like crazy and run up my bill, and that's a whole different issue. But I could easily cancel that, and that's not a big deal. Either way, I created this account strictly for testing. I created a bucket called YouTube Storage 10045. Again, let me make this bigger. I don't know why it's so damn small. There it goes. So I created this bucket called YouTube Storage 10045. Inside this bucket, I have a folder called staging. Now this is where your subfolders comes in. If you happen to have subfolders where you want your files to get uploaded to, that's where you're going to put in. In this case, I'm going to put in staging. But let's say you don't have a subfolder, or let's say you do have subfolders, but you don't want them to get uploaded to the subfolders. You want them to get loaded directly to the root bucket pass. Then this will just stay blank, right? So it all depends on where you want it. If you want to go into a specific folder, we'll specify the folder. Let's say you have a subfolder and a subfolder and a subfolder all within each other. We'll just specify all the folders, right? Let's say you have staging, and it's by year 2020. And it's by January, right? Something like that. We'll specify the whole pass. That's how you would do it. In our case, we only have one folder, like what I'm calling subfolder, which is staging. All right, so now if I go back, this is going to be my bucket. So let me go ahead and copy this bucket name. And then I'm going to get this configured. So now we have our bucket name configured and our bucket subfolder configured. Alright, so the next thing that is needed is going to be to enter in our access key ID and our secret key ID. So this information would come from, and I think I could show this, your identity and access management in AWS. So I created this user, which I called API user, and then this user had been configured for API access, and then ultimately you would get an API ID, and then of course your secret key. I'm not going to show that, of course, you know, but again, if you're familiar, if you have access to this, then you could go ahead and you got to get that set up first, or your admin needs to set it up, and they should be able to provide you with that user's API keys, pretty much. You could set this user. I created this user to only have access to an S3 bucket only. So this user does not have access to all of the other AWS resources like Glue or EC2 or, you know, whatever, right? It just doesn't have access to that. Strictly S3 bucket only. I'll make another video that relates to this. So if you're not familiar on how to configure a user for API access, I'll make a video showing that. So that's kind of on the list to do. So what I'm going to do next is let me go ahead and populate my information. I guess before I put in my credentials, let's take a look at this guy. You know, just to make sure that, you know, we're putting in, you're familiar with the information that needs to be put in. Let's see. So again, I have an account and I created this specifically for the purpose of making YouTube videos, which is called I Am Lou YouTube. So if I look at my URL, that's ultimately what my URL name is. My subdomain is I Am Lou. And so if you're not familiar, just go to your SharePoint site and you'll be able to figure out what your subdomain. Ultimately, it's your subdomain. So in my case, it's that. So I'm going to replace this guy. I have had some people where I think some of the issues they have had is they replace the word domain only, but you got to take away the curly brackets, just FYI. So that's pretty much the name. And then I'm going to replace this guy. And then of course over here where it says site, I need to specify the site name. Again, if you're not sure what that is, go to your SharePoint site and you'll see it right after sites. You'll see your site name, which in my case is called development. So let me go ahead and copy that. And there you go. Now I got all my info populated. The only thing I need to put in now is going to be my username, password, and of course my access keys. So I'm going to not show that information. So let me go ahead and get off of that. And let me go ahead and enter that in real quick. Okay, so I got all my credentials entered in, my AWS API keys entered into my config file, and of course my username and password for SharePoint connectivity. So let's go into the SharePoint file. This we copied over again from the previous project. We're not changing nothing in here. This stays exactly the way it is. So there's nothing to change here, right? So let's go ahead and close out of that. And let's go to project. So the project, there will be some changes here. This is a piece where we're going to end up modifying. All right. So some of the modifications that we're going to do, let's go ahead. Let me show you some of the changes that we're doing here. Right off the top, two of the things that we're going to be importing in is going to be the OS and JSON. And the reason why we're going to import that in is because we're going to be now reading the configuration file, right? The config.json file. We're going to be reading that file to extract our AWS keys, pretty much, because that's where we configured it. So we need to import that in. The next thing we need to import in is going to be our Bodo 3. Because this is, well, again, this is the package that's needed to connect to AWS. And then we're going to do from Bodo core exceptions import client error. This is more if we have any errors, we'll get that. We'll be able to get a response back and a message back to identify these errors. Okay, so now that we have that piece in here, well, we're gonna just, all of this you could keep, right? Again, look at the video, the previous video, and it'll kind of explain what everything is. This kind of gives you some insights. What we probably should do, let me specify some better description, just so hopefully it makes better sense. So this folder name is a SharePoint folder name. May include subfolders, right? So that means if your main folder happens to be, like in my case, in SharePoint. So if I go to SharePoint, it's called YouTube 2022. Okay, so that means this could be YouTube 2022. That's pretty much, this will be your argument that you will pass in that scenario. So the second argument pretty much is local or remote folder destination. Ultimately, this is where you want your files to get saved. So whenever you access a SharePoint file, you're going to download the files. But now you need to save these files somewhere. It could be locally. It could be some kind of other remote server. I mean, it's really up to you where you want to save it. In our case, we're going to be saving it locally, right? So if you happen to have a server that's running this script, for example, it could just save on that server temporarily. That's pretty much what that means. Let's see what else. Argument 3 is SharePoint file name. This is used when only one file is being downloaded. So pretty much only when you're going to access one file, right? You're not trying to download all the files in SharePoint, but just one file, then that's what you're going to put in. And then ultimately the last pattern is SharePoint pattern, file name patterns. Again, this is more if you're trying to find anything with a file name that starts with customer, right? So let's say you have a folder with 100 files, and maybe you have sales files in there, like, you know, they have other file that relates to calls, like CRM data, like files. Well, maybe you just want only the sales files, and you know when the file name has the word sales in it, you could do a pattern match for sales, and it would only download those files only. So that's the main purpose for that. The next thing that we're gonna do is we're going to, let me add some blanks here. We're gonna read JSON file, right? So again, same thing the way we did it in our SharePoint file. We did the same thing over here where we're reading JSON file. Same concept that we're gonna do. I mean, technically, I guess we're going to copy this as well too. So let's copy this. It's the same thing. Oh, you know what? I'm missing my pass, so I need to copy that as well, which is this guy. So let's copy this as well. All right. Again, same concept is reading the JSON file, and then we're gonna just pretty much put this in this object, this config object. Now, our key is not SharePoint. I believe, what did we call we call it AWS bucket. So it's gonna be AWS bucket, or whatever name you call it, right? If you call it something else, it will be that. Okay, now we're gonna end up having those 4 key values that we set in this AWS bucket, you know. So inside that object, we have a few attributes that we want to pull, which would be AWS access key, secret access key, bucket, and then of course bucket subfolders. So let's go ahead and put all of that in here. So I'm going to make this capital AWS access key ID. Let me just do everything real quick. AWS secret access key bucket bucket sub folder. Yep, subfolder. All right, so now we have everything. I'm going to call this config AWS access key ID, AWS secret access key, config bucket name, and then it will then it'll be config bucket subfolder. All right, so now we have all this in place. We're gonna still use a lot of these functions that we have. The save file, which again saves to your local directory or remote directly or network folder, wherever it is that you're trying to point it to. We're still gonna keep this, get files, get all of this. We're still keeping, right? The only difference is we're gonna be making some small modifications. But before we make those small modifications, we're actually gonna create we're gonna create two new functions. Right, so I'm going to call these function used for AWS, just call it that. So these are going to be specifically more so used for AWS. One of them is going to be the upload function for uploading, and the other function is going to be for bucket subfolders. Because depending if you populate a subfolder or not in your over here in your key in this attribute, right? And for this key value, if you provided a subfolder, then there has to be logic to say, okay, we're going to concatenate to know what subfolder to upload to. But if you don't provide a subfolder, then it needs to be blank. So we're going to create a function and kind of manage that. So let's create that function real quick. We're going to call this bucket subfolder build. Just call it that. And we're gonna, our parameter here is gonna be bucket subfolder, and then it's going to be file name. Right, so it's taking in two parameters. Two arguments: file name, bucket subfolder, and just making sure. Yep. All right, that should be fine. So we're gonna have some logic. This if bucket subfolder is not blank. Again, it's not blank, right? So we're gonna say if it happens to be not blank, we're gonna assign a value to this object called file pass name, and we're gonna use the join operator here, the join function, to join the bucket subfolder and file name. File name, which is going to give us this file pass name. Ultimately, what we're doing is we have a file name, then we're going to pretty much concatenate the subfolder, because that's how, and for AWS, that's how you got to provide it. You cannot provide the subfolder on the bucket name. Bucket name needs to be by itself. It needs to be added in front of the file name in order to know what folder to put it in. So I think it's kind of backwards. You would think that you could just add it to your bucket, but either way, it is what it is. Then if this is true, we're going to return back file pass name. All right. Else, it's going to be return file name. Right, so it's going to either return the file name, or it's going to return back the file name with the prefix of the bucket, the subfolder name. Right, it's going to be one or the other. So that's pretty much what this function is for. We're going to create another function, and we're going to call this upload file to S3. And this is going to take in the file directory path. So pretty much we need to provide the full, not just the file name, but we need to provide the full path of the file, like on the root path, right? So in Windows it'll be like C, whatever folder you have it in, so you know, etc. And then of course the file name. Linux, it will be what, home, then just user profile, you know, whatever file you put it in. It's just a full path. You got to provide all of that. Then it will be the bucket, and then we're gonna call this file name, right? What we're gonna do here is we're going to, let's create this object for S3 client, and this will be the Moto3 client. It will be S3, because S3 is the resource that we're looking for. This is pretty much the resource you want to use. It could be S3, it could be Glue, it could be EC2. I mean, whatever it is you're trying to use. The next thing is going to be the AWS access key ID equals AWS access key ID. Then AWS secret access key equals AWS secret, and that's it. So just kind of side note, if you happen to have the AWS command line interface installed on your machine, what it should do, it should look for your .aws config file by default. So whatever settings you have already set up in that file, it will just bring those in, and that's what it will utilize. In our case though, I don't have AWS command line interface installed on this machine. So because I don't have it installed, I gotta populate my keys, and that's this is the way to do it. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is, let's go ahead and do a try. We're gonna try, let's just call it response would be S3 client upload file, and then again we're going to populate here the file directory path, bucket, and then of course file name. So this just kind of show you what this means. The bucket needs to know what bucket to put it into, right? Number one. The file name, it needs to know what file name to save that file as. Just because you upload something to S3 bucket, like for example, let's say you upload a file, a CSV file that has the name sales totals, right? But you could rename that file if you want. Like, so as you upload that file, the sales total file, when it's saved in S3, it would actually save under a different name if the file name happens to be something different. So if you do want to rename your files, or or something of that sort, then that's where you want to do it. You want to make sure your file name represents that, because that's the name that is going to save it under. Except would be client error as E, and then we could print the error if we want to take a look at it, and then we'll do a return false, then we'll do a return true. Ultimately, we're saying here, if we want to evaluate if there was an error or not, we could tell by, we probably look at the response. That is one way, but another way would be to just look at the status. Did we get a did we get a false return from this function, or did we get a true return from this function? If it happens to be true, then we know everything was successful, everything's fine. If we receive false back, then we know something's wrong, right? So that's all this is trying to do. So now that we created this function, these two functions, better yet, I think we're good to go. Again, now what we're gonna do, we're gonna make some small tweaks to what we have. This could stay the same. This could stay the same. Get files stay the same. The only function that we're going to tweak is going to be this guy here, this get files. This is the one that we're going to be tweaking. And what we're going to end up doing here is, so for get files, even if we run the get files, we want mini files. As you could tell, we're iterating over that list, and then we're calling the get files function. So regardless, it's going to call it one by one. As we call this one by one, and it saves, which means it's going to save either our local directory or some sort of remote directory, but it's going to save it somewhere. The next thing that we want to do now is we're going to create an object for file directory path. And this would be our, oops, what am I doing? This would be our folder destination, which again is one of our arguments that we are passing in when we run our Python script. Then it will be file n for name. Okay, so ultimately this is setting the path of where is my file located at, pretty much, right? Like this is being saved to a specific folder, my save file. You can tell up here, doing the same thing, getting the file destination folder, and it's saving it to a specific path. Here, I'm just regenerating that to know what path that folder, that file was in, right? Because I'm going to need it. The next thing is now we need to create our file name. So this file name object is going to be ultimately what comes in here as file name, right? So if you are doing some modifications to your file name, maybe you're like adding like some kind of prefix or suffix at the end of the file name for whatever reason, maybe because you want to know that this is, I don't know, but if you want to add something to it, this will be the time to do that. Right, but in our case, we're not really renaming the file. We're just taking the file name that they are in SharePoint, moving them over to S3. So I'm going to end up calling my bucket subfolder build, and then we're going to pass in bucket subfolder, and then I'm going to pass in file name, and ultimately I'm going to be getting a new name for it, and the new name would only occur if there happens to be a subfolder presented. The reason why that needs to, let me just kind of type it out. If you do not have a subfolder, which means your files are going to get uploaded directly to a bucket, your file name will look something like, let's say, sales data.csv, right? But let's say you do provide a subfolder because you want to go into another folder. Well, let's say the subfolder is called staging. Well, what happens is now we need to add staging /sales data CSV. This is going to be the new file name. The reason why it needs to be in this format is in order to upload it to the subfolders, you have to append, in front of the file name, and then of course put a / the whatever path is going to, right? So if you happen to have multiple folder names where it's staging, and maybe it's, I don't know, year, then maybe it's January, ultimately this is going to be your new file name, because that's how it's going to know how to upload it. Also keep in mind, let's say let's say these folders don't exist, right? The 2022 in January, if you add it to your file name, like the way I just did right now, it's going to create those folders for you automatically. So just keep that in mind as well. It will create those folders for you automatically, even though they don't exist in the S3 bucket, right? So that's ultimately what this is doing here. And then ultimately, the final step here would be the upload to S3 bucket. And this is where we're going to provide the file directory path. Again, this has to be the full path of your file. So the full path and the file name. So it knows where to read the file from to upload to S3. And then we're going to provide the bucket. This has our bucket name. Then of course we're going to provide the file name. In this case, file name is really a new file name from file in, which is file name as well. It's a new an updated file name because it's taking the bucket into consideration. All right, so now that we have that, oh yeah, you know what? I forgot. See how we're hold on, is that right? Nope, everything's good. I think that's it, man. I think we have everything updated here that we needed to update it. Again, all we did was add 2 functions, and then we updated the get files function. Besides that, everything's pretty much the same. This stays the same down here below. So now what I could do is in my folder here, let me create another folder. I'm gonna call this stage, right? I'm gonna call it stage. So now let's go ahead and run the script and let's see if it works. Hopefully it works with no issues. So again, I'm using the environment that has all my packages installed. Man, let's make this bigger. There it goes. Too small. So now let's run this as Python project. Let's see, my first argument is going to be my folder name. In order to know what folder name, again, if we go back to, in my case, I'm going to take these files here. These are the files that I want. All right. Before I do anything, let me go to my S3 bucket, and I'm going to delete some. I have uploaded these files already when I was doing my testing, so let's go ahead and delete that. All right, so that's been deleted, and now let's delete the ones inside staging as well. Cool. So now that's all emptied out, right? We don't have no data there. What we're going to end up doing here, we're going to take these files, we're going to download these files. And again, it's coming from YouTube 2022. So if you have many subfolders in SharePoint, this is where we're going to have to specify YouTube /2022. And let's say if you got like a January or something, you got to specify the the full pass. In my case, it's only 2022. So that's argument number 1. Hit space. Argument number 2 is going to be, where do I want these files to be saved under? Like where do I want to save these files? My destination folder. This is going to be saved in here in the staging folder here. Let's see if I could copy pass. Yep, there it goes. So this is gonna, my files that I'm going to access from SharePoint, they're going to get saved into this folder. Again, it could be a network drive, wherever, it's up to you. Argument 3 and 4, where I want all the files. I don't want just one file. I want all of them. So what I'm going to end up doing, this is going to be none, space, none. Right? That's all I need to do. Now let's test it out. Let's run it. Oh no! What's wrong here? I spelled it wrong. Shit. Yep, that's what it was. All right, that's an easy fix. Let's run it again. All right, no error messages so far. Oh, there was an error message. What's happening here? No, oh yes, I forgot. Shit. Let me go back. So my second argument, which is my folder destination, like where I want to save the files to, I need to put those in double quotes. I forgot. Okay, now let's run it. Ooh, what happened here? Something happened. Failed to upload. All right, so let's see. What am I missing? This is right for my Git bucket. Save file. That's all. Oh, duh, what the hell? I got them backwards. Shit, no wonder. Okay, That makes sense. That makes sense. All right, so now let me save that. And now let's run it again. Let's see what happens. Damn it, what the hell again? All right, what's happening here? Failed to upload. Let's see if I even downloaded these files. So there's one file. So one file did get downloaded. That's good. It's pointing to the right path. There's the file name, CSV to YouTube storage 10.0045 staging. An error occurred. Signature does not match when calling the put operator. The request signature we calculated does not match. Check your keys. Trying to make sure that I know this was wrong initially. I did have it wrong. Oh damn, did I spell this wrong too? What the hell, man? All right, let me switch screen. Let me check my config file. Under secret key, I put in access key again. I don't know why. So it was, again, this issue was related to me typing in the wrong secret key. That's pretty much what it is. All right, so now let's go back. Let's rerun it again. Everything's fine. Let's run it. Hopefully you didn't, you put in the right secret keys under your there it goes. Now it ran successfully. Again, that was more my error. I just put in the wrong secret key. That's all it was. So you could tell we downloaded 3 files. It got saved to this folder. That's the same 3 file that we have here. Now if I go to my bucket, if I refresh, boom, now we see the same 3 files over here. And that's it. I mean, ultimately we did what we were trying to do. We downloaded the files and then we uploaded the files to an S3 bucket. So it wasn't too bad, pretty straightforward. Again, we took our existing project that we did and then we just made some small modifications. So if that project worked already for you, you got to do a few small tweaks, install another package, and you're good to go, man. Like you are good to go. So again, I got a request for this video. Hopefully it helps y'all out. I am going to be making another video related to this, and we're going to go in more details on some additional steps. So I am going to make another video, a part 2 of what we just did. And in this case, it's going to be more so after you move files over from SharePoint to AWS, we're going to then delete the SharePoint files, right, that we downloaded from, and have those removed. And same thing, the storage folder that we had locally, we're going to make sure that once the files get uploaded to AWS S3 bucket, that we delete the files from that folder as well, or your network folder or wherever. So that's going to be part 2. I'm going to make a video related to that where we kind of delete those files. So if you are trying to migrate over and maybe you're going to store, to an S3 bucket, because that's going to be your new archive place, then that will be another step to the part 2 would help you out on how to delete those files from SharePoint and of course your local directory paths. Hopefully this video helps. Again, give me a like, give me a follow if you can. Every Fridays we'll be streaming Drinking with Lou. We'll be testing tequilas, bourbons, etc. So we'll talk then. Peace.